You've got to live a life of harmlessness to the best of your ability. All right, so that's the foundation. And then we build on top of that. And the next is the restraint of the sense faculties. And how does one guard the doors of the sense faculties? Here, having seen a form with the eye, one does not grasp at the sign or the details, sometimes translated secondary characteristics, the signs and secondary characteristics. So what does that mean? Okay, what is this? You have any idea what this is? Okay, if you said cell phone or handy or however you translate the thing, how did you know it was? Well, it's a rectangle twice as long as it is wide. It's really thin. It's got buttons on the sides, got a screen, got a camera on the back. These are the signs of a cell phone. The secondary characteristics, is it Android or iPhone? What apps are loaded? How much memory does it have? What pictures are on it? All these are secondary characteristics, right? So one does not grasp at the sign or the signs or secondary characteristics, since if one were to dwell without restraint over the faculty of the eye, evil, unwholesome states such as covetousness and grief might assail one. Right? So the idea is that we use our senses to navigate our environment, but we don't get lost in it. You're walking down the high street and you pass a shop and you're going to meet your friend for lunch in 20 minutes. And you pass a shop and, oh, they've got those on sale. You didn't have restraint of the senses, right? You got the signs and you start thinking about the secondary characteristics, and next thing you know, you're more credit card in debt, right? So you walk down the street, you see they're on sale, and that's it. Yeah, you're not grasping at the signs or secondary characteristics. As you walk further down the street, you come to a bakery. The bakery has its door open, right? That's because the smell comes out, grabs you by your nose, drags you in, and you eat a delicious, healthy cinnamon bun, totally destroying your lunch. Yeah. You weren't guarding the senses. If you're guarding the senses, you see the sign for the bakery. And just before you get to the bakery, you exhale deeply. And as you pass the door, you inhale deeply. You enjoy the pleasant Vedana of the smell from the bakery and keep walking. All of this is possible to do. Right? So it's basically, it's not don't look. It's don't get entangled in what you see, or hear, or smell, or taste, or touch, or think about. The next one is mindfulness and clear comprehension. And how is one endowed with mindfulness and clear comprehension? In going forward and returning, one acts with clear comprehension, looking aside and looking ahead, bending, stretching the limbs, wearing robes and cloak, using the alms bowl, eating, drinking, chewing, savoring, going to the toilet, standing, sitting, lying down, waking up, speaking, remaining silent. Clear comprehension probably could be best interpreted as awareness of the context. Mindfulness by itself is not enough. If someone is a cat burglar, someone who sneaks into people's houses while they're sleeping and steals their valuables, they have to be extremely mindful, but they don't have clear comprehension. They're not aware of the context, right? So it's not just mindfulness, it's mindfulness and being aware of the context. It's interesting. Okay, mindfulness gets mentioned in the gradual training. It's not mindfulness of breathing. Well, actually, it does get mentioned. We'll get to that. But it's not, the body scan. It's not mindfulness of Vedana or mind states. It's mindfulness and clear comprehension, and it's spelled out in its full detail as exactly what you would find in the Satipatthana Sutta. In fact, mindfulness and clear comprehension occurs more often in the suttas than mindfulness of breathing. I know this because I've been building sutta indexes, right? I have a database of all the suttas translated by Bhikkhu Sujato. It's not the best translation, but it's all the suttas. And so I've been searching the suttas, and we get down here to mindfulness. 919 suttas on mindfulness. There's more on situational awareness, clear comprehension, 44 suttas, than there is on mindfulness of breathing. So mindfulness and clear comprehension is about paying attention to what's going on in the here and now. That's how I would translate mindfulness. An awareness of what's going on in the here and now. Ram Dass nailed it with his be here now, right? You're just paying attention to what's happening in the present moment, in the present location. And you're aware of the situation, the context. Is it a wholesome context or is it not? And the next one is contentment. And how is one content? One is content with robes to protect the body, alms foods to sustain the belly. Wherever one goes, one sets out only taking the requisites, which also includes medicine if you're ill. Just as a bird, wherever it goes, flies with its wings as its only burden. In the same way, a bhikkhu is content with robes, alms food, and the requisites. Now, we're lay people. We need more than 3 robes and a bowl. Okay, you do need a place to live. And yeah, in Western civilization, you often need a car, unless you're in a place with really great transportation, public transportation. But you don't need everything the culture says. Remember, liberation in the palm of your hand, letting go. This is what it's about. There's a comedian, George Carlin. Maybe you're familiar with him. He has this absolutely fantastic thing on stuff. His routine on stuff is brilliant. It's a Dharma talk. I had a fantasy of inviting him to come to one of my retreats, and when I got to this part on contentment, get him to get up and do his routine on stuff. He's maybe not the best person to learn right speech from, but after this is over, go to YouTube, plug in George Carlin stuff, and listen to his routine. It's so good. And it's really pointing to what the problem is, how we get stuck. We're lost in, our stuff. Okay, and contentment is about not being trapped with stuff. And this once again goes back to we're living in a time when there's a worldwide environmental crisis, and our stuff is what's causing it. So we want to live as best we can so that we're not contributing. One of the ways to think about morality is, if I do this, what would it be like if everybody did this? Right? I mean, the fact that you recycle, maybe it doesn't make a big difference, but what if everybody recycled? It might make a pretty big difference. So you want to do things that are going to be beneficial if everybody does it. And this is an important thing to keep in mind. Right? Okay, and move on to the next one, which is abandoning the hindrances. Endowed with this noble aggregate of moral discipline, noble restraint over the sense faculties, noble mindfulness and clear comprehension, and noble contentment. Okay, those are the preliminaries. This is what we need. One resorts to a secluded dwelling, a forest, the foot of a tree, a mountain, a glen, a hillside cave, a cremation ground, a jungle grove, the open air, a heap of straw. Basically, one finds a place where one won't be disturbed while meditating. Someplace quiet and yeah, not much else going on there. It is possible to meditate in noisy environments, but you're not going to get deep concentration. After I had learned this, well, when I learned it, I was unemployed. So that's how I got to go on the retreat. But then I got a job, and I would take the bus downtown. And where I lived, there was an express bus that began its route a couple of blocks from my house. It was like a 3-minute walk to where the express bus started. So it meant I always got a seat. And so I could meditate on the bus ride. You know, I had ridden the bus so many times, I knew what to look at out the window, and it was, I knew it all. So I would meditate, but, a bus ride is not the best place. But it would stop and pick up people, and then it would hit the express thing. And then eventually it would get downtown, and the doors would open, and I'd know, oh, I'm only 3 stops away. And so I meditated in a noisy environment. I didn't get a lot of great meditation, but it was really advantageous because in other situations where it wasn't perfect, I was able to meditate because it wasn't as noisy as a bus, right? So, if you're someplace and there's really nothing else to do, you could try meditating, even if it's not going to give you the best meditation. You're going to learn something about ignoring the disturbances. And that can be actually helpful long term. But ideally, you want to find a place where it's quiet and there's nothing else going on, where you won't be disturbed. And so a forest, the foot of a tree, a mountain, a glen, a hillside cave, cremation ground, jungle, grove, open air, heap of straw. These are the ones that are suggested. After returning from alms round, following the meal, one sits down, crosses one's legs, holds the body erect, and sets up mindfulness before oneself. Okay, so this is sitting meditation. And if you can sit cross-legged, that's great. It's a very stable position. However, we have these evil devices called chairs that have messed up our ability to sit cross-legged. So you can kneel on a bench, you can sit in a chair, and if necessary, you can lie down. The only problem with lying down meditation is falling asleep. Okay, if you're going to lie down, you should pull your knees up. Okay, so your feet are flat on the floor of the bed or wherever you're lying down. I also find it helpful to elevate the upper part of my body somewhat. Grab some pillows, put one under my lower back and 2 under my upper back and head, something like that. So I'm lying down in a position I don't sleep in, right? The pressure on the soles of your feet is a signal to your brain, oh, you're standing up, don't fall asleep. So that helps keep you awake. But sitting is probably the best posture. One holds one's body erect. You want to, if you're doing mindfulness of breathing, you want to have your chest open so that the air can flow freely. And this also helps keep you awake. And it says one sets up mindfulness before oneself. Literally what it says is one sets up mindfulness at the mukta. Mukta is literally mouth or opening. And I'm assuming that it means like the nostrils rather than your pie hole. Okay, we speak of the mouth of a cave, right? So in English, we can use mouth as opening, although it's fairly rare, but it seems to be more common here. So one sets up mindfulness at the opening of the nostril. So this is mindfulness of breathing. And it's mentioned here, but none of the 16 steps are given or anything. And then it talks about the various hindrances. Having abandoned covetousness for the world, one dwells with a mind free from covetousness. One purifies one's mind from covetousness. So the first hindrance is sometimes given as covetousness, and that's wanting something that somebody else has in English. And it's sometimes given as sensual desire, or as Ayya Khema translated, the desire for sensual gratification. So it's the wanting aspect of the mind. The examples given here are examples of sort of the most egregious form of the hindrance. And we have a simile that's given. Suppose a man were to take a loan, apply it to his business, and his business were to succeed so that he could pay back his old debts and have enough money left over to maintain a family. He would reflect on this, and as a result, he would become glad and experience joy. So if you take a loan, you have to keep paying back. If you say, want to go on a month-long retreat, you can't call up the bank and say, well, listen, I'm going on a month-long retreat. This is going to be very good for me. And so I'm going to skip the house payment this month. They don't like that, right? You have to keep working to pay it back. It's the same with our sense desires. If you see a beautiful sunset, do you think, oh, that was such a fantastic sunset. I never need to see another one ever. No, of course not. You're like, I'm coming out tomorrow night and see what the sunset is. Or you eat some ice cream and it's so good. You never have to eat ice cream ever again. No, of course not. You have seconds. You eat straight out of the carton the next time, whatever, right? So our sense desires only lead to more wanting. And so we're in debt to our senses. There is no sense pleasure that is ultimately satisfying. No matter how good it is, it simply leads to wanting more of the same. And so we're in debt. And we need to let it go, at least for the time of the meditation period. The total overcoming of sense desire, third stage of awakening. It's way down the path. But there is the possibility of overcoming sensual desire for the period of the meditation. When you're meditating and you become distracted, the first thing to do is to recognize that you become distracted and drop whatever the distraction is. There is no distraction if you're trying to generate concentration, which is what's going on here, that is useful. One thing that's very helpful can be to label the distractions. Planning, worrying, wanting, whatever comes to mind first is the correct label. You want to spend zero energy trying to get the perfect label. And then after you've labeled the distraction, relax and bring your attention back to your breathing or whatever your meditation object is. The labeling has two purposes. One, it helps you disidentify with the thought stream. I mean, you're in this fantastic fantasy and you realize you're distracted and you label it fantasy. It's a lot easier to drop it because you're like, yeah, I shouldn't be doing fantasies here. I should be meditating, right? And it gives you a sense of where your mind tends to go. Do you get distracted more often into the past or the future? Isn't it weird how seldom we get distracted into the present? I mean, the present is all we have. And yet almost always we're running back to the past. And that's our memories, and we know how accurate that is. Or to the future, and that's fantasies. Yeah, be here now. So label the distraction, and then very important, relax. Any distraction is going to produce at least a little bit of tension. And so just think to yourself, relax, or take a slightly deeper breath and let it out and relax. And then go back to just noticing the natural breath or your metta or whatever the practice is. Okay, so sensual desire comes up, label it. Wanting or desire or sensuality or whatever. And then relax and come on back. So the new sub-commentary has 6 things to be developed for the abandoning of sensual desire. So we have the suttas, right? And then about 200 years after that, they started writing Abhidhamma. They quit composing suttas. Yeah, you probably think all the suttas were from the time of the Buddha. Well, no, I don't even think the majority were from the time of the Buddha. They continued to compose suttas. They put words in the Buddha's mouth after the Buddha's death. But then they eventually stopped doing that, and they started composing the Abhidhamma, the higher Dhamma, which is the philosophy and psychology. Not particularly useful. Slightly interesting. I mean, I've studied the Abhidhamma some. I wouldn't recommend wasting your time. And then eventually they were like, we ought to write this stuff down. There's only one guy left. We're having a famine, and there's only one guy left that knows some of the suttas. We should write it down. This was in Sri Lanka in the 1st century BC. And so they started writing the suttas down. Now, they didn't have any paper. So what they did was they carved the letters into ola leaves. And then they would smear the ola leaves with some berry juice and then wipe off the excess. And where they'd carved, it would make an indentation. And where it was uncarved, the berry juice would wipe off. And they had the leaves of a book. And then they would put them all together. And so they were doing this for a while, and then they started writing commentaries on the suttas and the Abhidhamma. And the commentaries that we know are from the 5th century AD, again, out of Sri Lanka. And some of the material in the commentaries is useful or interesting, and some of the material in the commentaries is takes you in the wrong direction. After all, it was like 800 years after the Buddha's death in a completely different culture. So, yeah, use the commentaries carefully. All right. So in the commentaries, they explained everything in great, boring detail. And it was so great, boring detail that they had a sub-commentary, a commentary on the commentary. But even that had great, boring detail. So they had a new sub-commentary. So a commentary on the commentary on the commentary, which is a commentary on the Abhidhamma and the Suttas. Right? And the new sub-commentary says the 6th thing to be developed for the abandoning of sensual desire, learning the sign of the unattractive, that is the repulsive nature of the body, application to meditation on the unattractive, guarding the doors of sense faculties, moderation in eating, noble friends, and noble conversations. All right. The repulsive nature of the body. I think in the West, we need to get an accurate picture of the body rather than its repulsive nature. And application to meditation on the unattractive. I would say this probably could be better, more usefully used than to think, develop the ability to see the defects in whatever it is you're desiring. Nothing is perfect. The person you're desiring, they're not perfect. Mr. Right and Ms. Right, they found each other a long time ago and they're not available. Okay, there's only the imperfect people available. All right, so whatever you're desiring, whether it's a person or a place or a thing, it's less than perfect. So see the less than perfect nature of it. And that would be what I would say is the first two. And we've talked about guarding the doors of the sense faculties, moderation in eating. On a retreat, the only entertainment you got is food, maybe the Dharma talk, but food, right? And there's a reason they don't have meditation periods right after you eat. You got to spend time digesting your food. If you try and get concentrated right after you're eating, you just fall asleep. So, yeah, they do need people to wash the dishes, but you've got to wait till you've digested enough before you can really meditate effectively. So eat less food. And then noble friends and noble conversations. I will get back to that. All right, the next one is abandoning ill will and hatred. One dwells with a benevolent mind, sympathetic for the welfare of all living beings. So it's not only don't get involved in ill will and hatred, it's make it a habit to have a benevolent mind, sympathetic for the welfare of all beings. We have the simile down here. Suppose a man were to become sick, afflicted, gravely ill, so that he could not enjoy his food and his strength would decline. After some time, he would recover from that illness and would enjoy his food and regain his bodily strength. He would reflect on this. As a result, he would become glad and experience joy. So, yeah, when we are angry, it doesn't feel good. When we have hatred, it especially doesn't feel good. It's like being ill, hot, can't think straight, etc. But luckily, there are 6 things to be developed for abandoning ill will and hatred. Learning the sign of loving kindness, application to meditation on loving kindness. Reflection on the ownership of action, abundance of wise reflection, noble friends, and noble conversations. So the first 2 is metta meditation. You've got to know what metta feels like. It usually gets translated as loving kindness. I think that's kind of wimpy. I want to translate it as unconditional love. The Greeks have the word agape. Yeah. Loving someone just because they're someone, not because they do wonderful things for you or anything like that. So learn what it's like to have unconditional love. And then if when you're meditating, ill will and hatred comes up, anger, etc. First thing is, label it, relax, come back. But if it's persistent, switch from whatever practice you are doing to doing metta meditation. It doesn't have to be metta for the person you're angry at. That may be too much. Maybe you do metta for the Dalai Lama or your best friend or yourself. But just get your mind out of the ill will and hatred. And then when you're calmed down again, you can go back to the breath or whatever. Or maybe you just continue with the metta meditation. It's a very powerful practice. In fact, if they were to come to me and tell me, you can only do one practice, choose, I would choose metta. It'll get you concentrated. And I found, not while I was doing metta, but afterwards, insights were available because of the concentration and the pure mind that I had. Reflection on the ownership of action. Ever done something when, you were in a bad mood, you were angry, and it wasn't the wisest thing? You can't call up the karma gods and go, well, I was angry then. Can we just let that go? No, you still are going to have to deal with the consequences. An abundance of wise reflection, realizing that, when you're caught up in ill will and hatred, you're actually putting yourself in a powerless position because you're liable to do something that's not the best thing to do, right? And it feels horrible, okay? And noble friends and noble conversations. Having abandoned, it says, dullness and drowsiness, sloth and torpor is the usual. One dwells perceiving light, mindful and clearly comprehending. One purifies one's mind from sloth and torpor. One dwells perceiving light. This is good if you're sleepy, right? If you're finding that you're really sleepy, open your eyes and stare at the brightest light you can. It can be helpful to rub your cheeks, pinch and pull on your earlobes. If you know where the acupressure point is on the side of your ears, you can squeeze that. That will wake you up. And if all else fails, stand up. If you're standing with your eyes open, you're probably not going to fall asleep. You can do standing meditation. If you're going to do standing meditation, it's very important that you flex your knees. Don't lock them. If you lock them, you can pass out. Very unpleasant, landing on the furniture or somebody else. Right? So flex your knees, and then you can put your attention in the subtle motions you're making to keep your balance. When we're standing very still, there's still little tiny motion going on, and you can make that the object of your attention, or you can just follow the breath or do metta. And we have the simile. Suppose a man were locked up in a prison. After some time, he would be released from prison safe and secure with no loss of possessions. He would reflect on this, and the result would become glad and experience joy. So when you're in prison, yeah, you miss out on all the good things. You're sitting there being useless. If you sit down to meditate and you fall asleep, pretty useless. Or you're lazy and you think, oh, I don't want to meditate today, I'll meditate tomorrow. Yeah, that's pretty useless as well. Again, we have 6 things to be developed for abandoning sloth and torpor. Recognizing that overeating is the basis of sloth and torpor. Right? So if you don't overeat, you're combating 2 hindrances as well as making yourself more healthy. Changing the postures, like standing up, attention to the perception of light, looking at the brightest light you can see with your eyes open, living in the open air, right? Make sure you've got fresh air. If it's stale, it gets a lot of carbon dioxide there. Yeah, that's going to tend to put you to sleep. Noble friends and noble conversations. The laziness part, not really getting around to meditating. The thing I found most helpful there was some way of becoming inspired. There was a time when I had this little book of 1 or 2 page teachings that sat on the coffee table in front of where I sat on the couch to meditate. And so I'd sit down and read 1 or 2 pages, and then I would start my meditation. So find something that's inspiring. You can read a sutta. You can read, a chapter in a book that you find inspiring, something like that, if you're kind of feeling lazy and, I'm not going to meditate today. Okay. Having abandoned restlessness and worry, one dwells at ease within oneself with a peaceful mind. One purifies one's mind from restlessness and worry. Worry is the usual translation, but I looked up the Pali word, and it actually is remorse. It's worrying about what happened in the past. To take an egregious example, if you've been out robbing banks and you sit down to meditate, you're probably going to worry about the fact that you're going to get caught and not get concentrated, okay, or whatever you did in the past. So it's more restlessness and remorse is what we're dealing with. The restlessness can be physical restlessness in that you just can't quite get settled. No matter how you sit, it's uncomfortable. And you've probably all been there. Or your mind is restless. You sit down and it's just all over the place. I notice sometimes when restlessness shows up, like in the middle of a meditation, it's because I'm physically uncomfortable. My meditation is going well and I'm not really noticing my body. And then suddenly I start getting lots of distraction. And it turns out that my body is a bit uncomfortable. And rather than notice the discomfort, I'm covering it up by being restless and thinking about whatever. And so if that's the problem, then I just adjust my seating posture. If you're going to move when you meditate, you want to be really mindful of moving. You want to pay careful attention to the intention to move, and then move mindfully, and then notice how long it takes to settle back in. So it is possible. You're going to lose some of your concentration when you do that, but probably better to move and resettle yourself in a comfortable position than sit there having your first reactions to the uncomfortableness or being restless because you're uncomfortable. We have the simile down here. Suppose a man were a slave without independence, subservient to others, unable to go where he wants. After some time, he would be released from slavery and gain his independence. He would no longer be subservient to others, but a free man able to go where he wants. He would reflect on this and as a result become glad and experience joy. So a slave is very busy all the time doing what the master commands, not what the slave wants to do. It's the same thing with restlessness or remorse. The mind is just doing something else, or the body is just doing something else, and you're not actually accomplishing what you want to do. But as usual, there are 6 things to be developed for abandoning restlessness and worry. Much learning, interrogation, skill in the Vinaya, associating with senior monks and noble friends and noble conversations. So much learning. The Buddha definitely recommended learning the Dharma and asking questions. But yeah, a lot of the suttas are the result of someone coming to the Buddha and asking a question. Sometimes the Buddha would ask a counter question. The king wants to know, what are the fruits of the spiritual life? May I ask you, or I will ask you a question, great king, answer as you see fit. So the Buddha's asking questions. Sometimes he would just give a yes or no answer. Sometimes he would give a whole discourse. So in the sutta we had the counter question, and then we had the whole discourse. And sometimes the Buddha would just stay silent. I think that's a great thing. I wish we'd bring it back in our culture. So if somebody asks me a stupid question, all I can do is just smile. I don't have to say a thing. Well, anyhow, if you ask a question, I won't do that to you. So yeah, learn what you can, ask questions, skill in the Vinaya, skill in the precepts. If you have skill in keeping the precepts, you're going to have less to be remorseful about, right? Because you won't be doing things that are not useful. Associating with senior monks, associating with wise people. This is really important. The Buddha speaks repeatedly about associating with wise people. Once again, noble friends and noble conversations. And then the last one, having abandoned doubt, one dwells as one who has passed beyond doubt. Unperplexed about wholesome states, one purifies one's mind from doubt. This unperplexed about wholesome states seems to have come from the Jains. The Jains were another religion at the time of the Buddha, and they were very much concerned about what was wholesome and what was not wholesome. And part of their practice was to overcome doubt about what is wholesome and not wholesome. And that seems to have been incorporated into the Buddha's teachings. Now, whether the Buddha incorporated it or it got incorporated later, we have no idea. Suppose a man with wealth and possessions were traveling along a desert road where food was scarce and dangers were many. After some time, he would cross over the desert and arrive safely in a village which is safe and free from danger. He would reflect on this, and as a result would become glad and experience joy. So you're on a perilous desert journey, and this way is going to be bandits, and that way is not going to be food, and this other way there's not going to be any water, and you're not sure where to go, and you do more starting and stopping than actual progressing. This happens on the spiritual path. You start out with Vipassana. It's kind of dry, not a lot of excitement here. You look around, you see the Tibetans. I mean, look how colorful it is. Look at their tankas. And they got horns, right? Yeah, so you switch to Tibetan. A little too Baroque, a little too Catholic. Zen, it's got to be Zen, right? Because, look at their gardens and they got all these great stories. And so you switch to doing Zen. Turns out they hit you with a stick. Sufi dancing, right. You're not making any progress at all. I've heard it said that if you really want to know where a spiritual path leads, you need to follow it for 5 years to really get a sense of it. It just doesn't mean that if you start on a path and you just know this is not right for me, you're stuck there for 5 years. But if you find yourself going from one tradition to another, to another, to another, it might not be the paths. It might be you're looking for something that maybe isn't the wisest. Right? The other thing about skeptical doubt, it can be doubt about the Buddha. Did he really know what he was talking about? Doubt about the Dharma. Is this the truth? Doubt about the Sangha. Did anybody else ever get enlightened? Can anybody get enlightened today? Are there any enlightened people today? Are there any people making progress on the spiritual path today? Doubt about the teacher, the teachings, and the most insidious doubt of all, doubt about yourself. I can't do this. It's too hard. Well, yeah, it's hard. If the spiritual path were easy, we'd all gotten enlightened years ago, right? A lot of work has to go into this. It's worth it. Definitely, it's worth it. And of course, there are 6 things to do for overcoming skeptical doubt. Much learning, interrogation, skill in the precepts. Just these are the same as for restlessness and remorse. Resolution, resolving to stay with the path long enough to see where it really goes. And noble friends and noble conversations. There's a sutta where Ananda, who was the Buddha's attendant for 25 years, is having a conversation with another monk, and they're discussing what's the most important aspect of the spiritual path. And the other monk was the meditation master, and so he said the most important thing was meditation, of course. But Ananda was a very gregarious, outgoing soul, and he thought that it was noble friends and noble conversations. So they discussed it back and forth, and as always happens, they go see the Buddha, salute, sit down at one side, and Ananda says, "Venerable Sir, I say that noble friends and noble conversations are half the holy life." And the Buddha says, "Do not say so, Ananda. Noble friends and noble conversations are the entire holy life." Yeah, this is hard to do by ourselves. We really do need support on the spiritual path. I mean, the Buddha, okay, so he managed to do it by himself. He didn't have any instructions. He did practice with other teachers. You know, he had 2 teachers at the first, and then he was doing those austerities with his 5 friends. So, yeah, he had noble friends. They were having noble conversations, just wasn't taking him where he wanted to go. And so he did go off by himself and start practicing jhanas and become fully awakened. I couldn't do that. I don't know anyone who could. We all are going to need support. And the place to find that support is with noble friends and noble conversations. When one sees that these 5 hindrances are unabandoned, one regards that as debt, sickness, confinement in prison, slavery, a desert road. But when one sees these 5 hindrances have been abandoned, one regards that as freedom from debt, good health, release from prison, freedom from slavery, place of safety.